Beauty before brains.
Oh, that was pretty funny, actually. That is funny.
Hey, on my brain right now that I thought of that in the last 40 seconds, I should get like some kind of an award.
I was maybe going to say beauty before bombardment.
As a matter of fact, I'm going to put on the peppermint right now because I want to make sure that I can ask our friend Mary some good questions without seeming like.
Hey, before you take this slide down,
okay.
A picture always speaks 1,000 words. I mean, just looking at the picture of some of these guys over here, I mean, you're just like, wow, is that really just from picture alone? Is that the best we can do?
The dudes, it's the dudes. And notice they're all under what, 55? I don't know how old Stead is. I mean, what is he, 40 something, or I don't know.
Stead? I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know how old he is. Okay, so do we want to bring on our good friend?
Of course.
I do. I want to know what she's got going. All right, so are you there, Mary?
I am here. Can you hear
me?
Mary,
hi, Mary. How are you?
I am excellent on this fine, windy Friday afternoon.
Yeah, let's not talk about the windy part.
You've been through a lot.
I don't want to traumatize Jenny anymore.
We'll just talk about what a fine day it is.
We will.
Yeah.
So here's a trivia question here.
Yes.
Did you know that rhinos don't run in a herd? They run in a crash?
No. I wondered what that was. Why you put that up, crash.
Isn't that fitting that rhinos run in a crash? Because we've got a lot of it going on in Oklahoma at the state capitol.
I would agree. I've always loved what crows fly in.
What is that?
A murder.
A murder.
It is. It's a murder of crows. No joke. Look it up. I love that one.
That is
maybe we'll start calling them crows because they fly in a murder. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I know what we're going to get into here, but I do want to make just one little comment on Adam Pugh, a very good friend of mine, which I've got a lot of background noise since everybody's home. A very good friend of mine who works at Boeing. When during COVID, and Boeing, is one of the most woke companies out there. And during COVID, they were hammering vaccines and all that stuff. And my friends, they went over to Adam, and Adam's like, I'm going to go down there. I'm going to make sure, we're represented, that they can't, force this stuff on you, and Adam was going to be the hero. And he literally never returned another call to my friends in that representation, didn't do a single thing to help any of those people that he said he was going to help on the whole forced vaccine, or they were going to get fired deal. And maybe there's not much he could have done, but he didn't do anything. I can tell you that.
Well, very fitting, given what we're going to talk about today. Their public messaging and what happens behind closed doors in politics are so incredibly different in Oklahoma. For one of the most conservative populaces in the country, I think we may have the biggest problem as far as misrepresentation in our elected officials. You have to run, basically, unless you're in a couple of the few little liberal enclaves in Oklahoma, you have to run as a Republican or you're not going to get elected. So it causes so much duplicity in what they're really aiming to do and serving the people.
Wait. You call it duplicity. I'm going to call it lying.
I would bet Webster would call them synonyms if I'm going out on a limb.
And I meant to mention this during Jason's podcast this morning, Jenny, just to dovetail in, because Mary I don't think you probably listened to that, Mary, but we were talking about how blue the state probably really is, just in actions, not in people saying that they're Democrats. But I will tell you, if you go knock doors for a school board member, you will see real quickly how many registered Republicans are real liberal. I mean, real liberal. because I have a lot of experience with that.
That is interesting. Well, that may play in here. So today, if I can share my screen, I put it up there for you all. I'm going to go back just a couple of steps before I get into the most current reporting, because we're going to talk about politics and public education. And as the three of us have talked about so many times, public education is Oklahoma's political battleground. And a lot of it is because for politicians, that controlling education means you're controlling the largest chunk of the state's budget. It's usually at or just below or just above half of the entire state's budget. And then for the education establishment, which they don't like to be called unions, they don't like to be called all kinds of things, I'm going to call them from now on education NGOs, because that's what we're finding out with all of this coming out with USAID. They are education.
Well, and the TPS audit. Don't forget the TPS audit.
Correct. They definitely have a role in this, and it's really no different. But for them, controlling education means they control the public narrative, they control education policy. It makes them literally the best compensated people in public education, and it allows them to hide a lot of the critical failures in their leadership at the top echelons of Oklahoma public education. Number one, in my humble view, is the epidemic of child sexual abuse in schools and the roles they played at the top in perpetuating this. So there's this weird mutually beneficial relationship between all of these education NGOs and administrators and politicians in Oklahoma. And you see, when you look at it, there's just a disproportionate number of former educators, school administrators, coaches in the state legislature. They hold all these positions on the ed committees. They're gatekeeping ed policy, even when we get a good new representative who's trying to do something for parents. They're blocking that. And then the ed NGOs, which I'm talking about, the teachers unions, I'm talking about the school administrators unions, school board, the OSSBA, also the Organization of Rural Schools, those kind of things. There's a whole bunch of them. It's not just the big three. Typically, those are all run by former not state superintendents, but district superintendents. Yeah. And they always put forward their state superintendent candidate. And typically that person is in control. They control the State Department of Ed. They control the State Board of Ed. And that's usually how it goes in Oklahoma, unless whoever the current governor is fights back against it. And that's sort of where we were during Governor Stitt's first term, that 2018 to 2022 period. If someone was attacking education on his side, they were also attacking Ryan Walters, who was his Secretary of Education appointed at the time. So they were sort of on one side of the panel, and then this education establishment was on the other with the politicians. That has completely changed since the 2022 election. Governor Stitt became a lame duck governor, and we all have our opinions about what happens to lame duck politicians. But bigger than that, Ryan Walters no longer serves at the pleasure of the governor. Ryan Walters was elected with a mandate by the people. And from there, the relationship, he went to work for the people, and the relationship between the two has changed. And that has a lot to do with what's going on right now in this legislative session. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Governor Stitt can't control him, so that's a problem. Mm-hmm. I think, honestly, I think that's the biggest reason why all of this happened in the first place is he couldn't control him. I mean, because Governor Stitt likes to control everything. If he doesn't like it, just like he'll throw the 3 members of the board off and put new ones on. He'll throw 2 women off of that are doctors off of the healthcare board and put people on that he just likes. So that's just the way he rolls.
Well, and that's not a mental health professional, so I'm not going to talk about his control issues, but I think that plays in. I want to run really quickly a review of some of our coverage over the last 3 or 4 months, because I think exactly what you're saying. You start to see these patterns emerge that normally in the media, they just hit a headline about one thing, and they don't start to sort of see how the relationships, the mutually beneficial relationships at the Capitol start to happen. So going back here to this particular article was in November, and we talked about politics, public ed, and perpetrators. Now, this was when The education NGO lawyers and our attorney general, Drummond, were disrupting the Board of Education. And there was a superintendent from Shawnee who was accused of sexual misconduct, multiple allegations from 3 different districts over a number of years that he'd been at. He was super connected to those NGOs, the state and national level of the school administrators. So this is one of the first times we saw them come out full guns trying to protect somebody from the revocation process of their certifications. Also, he was connected to Tulsa Higher Education, Joy Hoffmeister. One of his last scandals, which was out in Cleveland, Oklahoma, she sort of grabbed him, Joy Hoffmeister, and brought him into the Oklahoma State Department of Education when she was there. And then he slid into Shawnee Public Schools. And I say slid because the school board meeting in Shawnee where he was elected as CFO and assistant superintendent, they didn't even put his name on the agenda. Parents never even had an opportunity to say, wait, wasn't there a scandal about this person? Maybe this isn't good. But if you remember at the time, April Grace, who would have been his boss now at Shawnee schools, was running against Walters in the Republican primary in 2022, right? So that all fell apart. Her campaign fell apart largely because the Ron Arthur scandal, who's a basketball coach who was molesting boys. He's now temporarily in jail. And she did lose the primary, but she was picked up at the Oklahoma Public Schools Resource Center. So it appears that if you will even attempt to do the establishment's bidding, you will end up with a job over $160,000. And just so you know about the Oklahoma Public Schools Resource Center that sort of grabbed her after this, they operate under 2 EINs, and those are the numbers sort of that establish your organization with the IRS and the federal government. One of them gets their funds. It's kind of the backdoor one that's not out in public, gets funds from USAID, and the other one is running mainly on a federal grant. So just kind of soak that in.
Wait, hold on. So what's the part that's the USAID part?
So it is also, I have to go look it up again, but it operates under OPSRC with another acronym behind it, an extra few letters to it, and it's the one that gets USAID funds. I'm going to put something in print about that. I just sort of discovered that. So be watching for that. And then the other one is running on a big, like a $21 million over a couple of years federal grant that kind of walked in when April Grace walked in. So you do have to sort of look at timing, what's happening with federal government influence, these NGOs in Oklahoma. There's just layers and layers of them affecting policy. So in this particular article, we talked about how the NGO lawyers filed an injunction concerning this person, trying to keep his certifications in place. At one meeting, when he was up for suspension, the next meeting, Attorney General Drummond replaced the board's attorney with a huge conflict of interest to sort of intervene in that. And in the meantime, there was just a tribe of legislators who were trying to disrupt the executive sessions of the board. And Attorney General Drummond stepped in again and reversed a 45-year opinion and said, oh yeah, those legislators can step into those private sessions where they talk about suspending teachers due to misconduct. So then that's just sort of get us to the current legislative session. So then the November 2024 elections happened. Some people termed out. Mark McBride, who was really leading this charge against the State Board of Education, termed out. You expect things to get better, but really just a whole new breed of them stepped down is what we're seeing. So now we're in the current legislative session, right? And the political attacks now become very legislative against, and I don't call this against the board, against Ryan Walters. I call it against the mandate for education reform that came from the people. Because it doesn't matter who's sitting in that seat. That's going to still continue, okay? So they sought to, these are 2 people who are on a lot of the education-related committees in the House. This is Danny Sterling and Dick Lowe. They're both former ag teachers. They're both former school administrators. They're both on all these ed committees. And they put up a bill. It was actually Sterling put it up and then Lowe jumped on. House Bill 1937 that sought to undo a law from last year that said teachers can no longer be texting individually with students, communicating, right? So they put up something saying, no, we want to give an opt-out. There was a lot of talk about how it's inconvenient for teachers. There are all these emergency situations where you should be able to talk to students one-on-one.
Because pigs need reassurance.
Exactly. There was some of their animal might be sick in the barn. And what people need to constantly understand is that the law that was in place from the previous year doesn't say that you can't communicate with a kid. If you're a teacher, a coach, an administrator, it says put a parent on the call, put a parent on the text. So none of it really made any sense. And then we highlight that Sterling, he was the principal at Tecumseh High School. One of his hires, after he left to become a House rep, was caught sending pictures that he shouldn't have been sent. So there's a pattern of passing the trash that can be loosely tied to all of these legislators, and that's sort of been the policy. Currently, House Bill 1937, after the publication, they dropped the opt-out of it. They got a lot of pushback about this bill, and they dropped the opt-out, but now the local school board gets to determine what an emergency is and make exceptions to that law. And they had to put in there that once a student graduates or has a GED, they are fair game for school employees to be communicating with one-on-one. And that it used to say that violators of the law who were caught one-on-one texting with a student shall be put on leave pending internal investigation. Now it says they may be put on leave, and that's up to the local school board. So it's not exactly a no tolerance law anymore.
Okay, stop.
Okay.
So they want local control, but I'm going to tell you that you have to have a cell phone policy. Make that make sense.
Right. So this bill of theirs, the bill just next to it that flew through committee, was no cell phones in school in the House. So what they were essentially saying is, parents, you don't get to talk to your kids during the school day, but educators should be able to one-on-one with your kids 24/7. So exactly, good point. So that started happening. Next, we had what you were speaking about, that Governor Stitt now sort of shifted to the other side of the road. He jumped from being under attack most often alongside Ryan Walters to joining the education establishment and the Uniparty at the Capitol. So he removed 3 State Board of Ed members, really with no notice. And I was able to interview Kendra Wesson, which was my first conversation with her, really revealing, obviously a motivated public servant who was doing a good job with the people's mandate. And it really revealed the difference between the public messaging and the private maneuvering of our conservative governor, so-called conservative governor.
I was going to say, we can't see you doing air quotes.
Yes, so-called. So Kendra Wesson had a couple of short conversations with Stitt about moving from the State Board of Education to the Oklahoma Tax Commission. So that would be moving her from a volunteer position to a really lucrative job. It's a big compliment that it's over $160,000 a year. And it makes sense because she's the president of an accounting firm. And Wesson has the receipts. She gave us the text messages. These offers did happen. And we published that. So Stitt revealed in one of these conversations that this was really about immigration, that these removals from the board were about immigration. And if you look back at a January board meeting, the State Board of Education voted to collect immigration status on students, including like the language, their native language that they speak. The superintendent of Oklahoma City Public Schools gave a presentation at that meeting, and she said, our kids speak 71 languages. We have to know this. We have to be able to plan. We are overwhelmed by this. So there were 3 board members present that day, which is really unusual because attendance at the State Board of Education is usually 100%. 2 were missing. So the 3 who were there that voted to collect this immigration information on students were then ripped off the board shortly after by Stitt. The 2 that decided to skip that day were retained.
Thanks to a possible phone call or text message. Maybe you don't want to go today.
I don't have any information about it, but
I'm just saying, I think we can, I think it's worth it to think about. I mean, nobody knows, but I'm just saying. And by the way, let's also make sure that we understand that subsequent to that happening, I went back and looked at a number of databases that are used in the state to collect information on children. And what were they collecting? Immigration status.
Sure.
So what are you going to do, Governor Stitt? You're going to go find all of those databases and figure most of them, which are federally operated, and get them to take that out? Are you going to order all principals not to keep their database person from entering that information?
Correct. And the amount of information that's already being collected about students is overwhelming, including that. And there are a number of bills. You did a show the other day about how much more information this legislative session is suggesting that they collect. So, right, this is clearly sort of a political fight. And I think you just expressed that pretty clearly. But Kendra Wesson was shocked when she was removed, not just her, but 2 others are removed from the board that had never been mentioned in the conversation. She thought it was specifically about her and her skill set, moving to somewhere she could be better utilized. So immediately after that happened, Superintendent Walters placed her and another board member that was removed, Katie Cubido, as co-chairs on an OSDE board, a Trump Education Advisory Committee that they've been talking about since November. Significant amount of policy change about education coming from President Trump in his second term. And this was supposed to be an advisory committee to make sure that that policy was carried out in Oklahoma. Within hours of being appointed to that by Walters, Kendra Wesson revealed that she got a call from Tom Newell, who is now Stitt's chief of staff. And
he a former representative who has been working for school choice organizations.
And he briefly was over at OCPA for just a handful of months. I don't know what happened with that, but he ended up at the governor's office as chief of staff. So he calls Wesson within hours of this appointment to I'll call it the Trump board. And he gives her, on behalf of Stitt, an ultimatum. And he says, it's Team Stitt or it's Team Walters. And for you to take this now paying job, you've got to publicly disavow this whole Trump Doge thing. So that was incredibly revealing about what happens behind closed doors. And I think really brave of a public servant like Wesson to come out and say, this is what's happening behind closed doors. It's not in the people's interest. So there were serious conflicts of interest about the 3 people that Stitt appointed to replace the 3 that were serving. One is the spouse of an education union lead, and one is involved in something that's sort of directly tied to a potential benefit in Stitt's sort of unusual MOU, Memorandum of Understanding with Denmark about green energy. So one owns 2 different businesses that have to do with airplane engines and biofuels for airplanes. And that MOU specifically talks about the development of biofuels for that purpose. And there's nobody else in the state that I can find that does that. So those folks, those 3, 2 with major conflicts of interest, get sworn into the board last minute before the next meeting. No one expected them to be there. Hadn't been confirmed by the Senate. And the first thing out of the airplane engine guy's mouth is, I want to make a motion to stop talking about immigration.
That just seems like coincidence. Isn't that coincidence? I mean,
it is. It is.
It could not be that planned, could it be?
No, they couldn't have a mandate going on to the State Board of Education.
Wow.
Yes.
It's like a joke. It's like a literal joke just played on us.
And don't forget, Van Landingham has gotten tons of tax credits from the state of Oklahoma.
Well, that's interesting. Let me go down to in this article. I encourage you all to go read these articles. There's a lot of detail that there's no way that I can possibly cover in this format, but let me get you to Mr. Vandenhand. Yes, this is Mr.
Vandenhand.
Vandenhand. So he owns Mint Turbines and Southwest Fuel Systems. And the very first thing he said in the board, interrupted right after the state superintendent gave his opening comments, and he said, I'm concerned about the immigration status issue because we've had a lot of pushback in my area from parents and students. I don't know when he's been talking to parents and students in his aeronautical business.
Do you know where his area is?
Yes, it's actually up by Stroud. And I think someone who has any input to the DOT, those kind of things, should look into those companies getting a specific exit off of the turnpike that goes to their establishment.
Well, that was Kevin Wallace's district.
Okay.
Which is now Jim Shaw's district, but it's right next door to me in Lincoln County. That's where he's from.
Yes.
Kind of interesting.
Yes, it is. So again, these folks are sworn in and he immediately wants to make a motion. And there's a huge discussion about you can't put things on the agenda. Like, because of state law, it has to be on the agenda. The public has to know what's coming before you start just showing up and throwing out topics that they're not ready for and they don't have time to weigh in on. So there's a huge discussion about the agenda. That's how the meeting started and that's how it ended, which brings us to the next piece. The next article we wrote was about our very young new Speaker of the House. So Kyle Hilbert is our brand new Speaker. He is 30 years old. And at the February board meeting ended with that battle about agenda control. Almost immediately after, Kyle Hilbert flipped a bill to give those members of the State Board of Education the ability to add whatever they want to the State Board of Education agenda. Let me tell you why that usurps the people. So the state constitution, because the state superintendent is the only elected person sitting on the Board of Education at that table, only one the people picked, right? It gives a special, our state constitution, and it's under Article 6, Section 1, you can go look, gives him a really special role. The state superintendent runs the OSDE. He is the automatic chair. We don't vote for who's going to chair the State Board of Education. And he is the executive officer. So he has powers and controls over agendas, what's going to be discussed. The Board of Ed is supposed to look at his proposals and either accept, reject, give input. So they are overriding. Now Kyle Hilbert steps in and he flips House Bill 1491. And he does it after 5 o'clock on March the 4th. So 1491 was Representative Ronnie Johns, another Republican, former teacher, coach, administrator in Ada. It was his bill, and it was going to make it harder for the State Board of Education to suspend and revoke teacher certificates. I mean, it was far enough down the line that Johns had already amended his own bill, and he had dropped in both incompetency and neglect as reasons to suspend a teacher, and he had added conviction of a crime as a reason. So this was an ugly bill to start with. We didn't need it anyway. So you think, oh, if it's stripped, that might be okay. Hold your horses on that. So after 5 p.m. on March 4th, Hilbert completely guts it. He does a bill flip and basically says State Board of Education appointees, not the chair, have the ability to get agenda items on. So he's going to hijack the conversation at the State Board of Education. The following morning, literally hours later, the Education Oversight Committee voted 9-0 to pass that out of committee. This was as fast as you can do it. 2 Democrats were added as co-authors, and Senator Reinhardt signed on to carry it in the Senate. Okay. Immediately, the governor and the speaker come out with in unison posts and PR saying this is for parents and no one person should control the State Board of Education. That is a lie. This is against the state constitution, and it is taking control of the education narrative out of the hands of the only elected person. And that's why I don't like to focus on who's in that seat right now. That somebody else will be in that state superintendent seat, and the people will no longer be able to have a say on education policy with their votes for state superintendent. I know that's a lot, That's a lot with things going on here, but I just want to say the old 1491, House Bill 1491, that was going to make it harder to suspend teachers did not go away. They stripped that language. So we have a shell game now. Here's the second flip into House Bill 1075. Okay. So let me talk about 1075 now that do you see how they're shifting things so fast that people can't keep up with them? The grassroots groups can't keep up with what they're doing in the middle of the night. 1075 was a really good bill, and it was put forward by Derek Hildebrandt. He's a brand new Republican out of Catoosa. It's District 23. He was just sworn in. This is his first term. What it said is that school districts must report all of these resignations of teachers. So when teachers resign, particularly when we see them resigning mid-year, that is how they are passing teachers accused of misconduct on, passing the trash. So it said, nope, you've got to tell the state, the Oklahoma State Department of Education about these resignations, the conditions around them. It also added school administrators and support staff to this kind of oversight, not just teachers and misconduct, because we've had some superintendents, we've had principals, we've had custodians. We need to get them all in there. It did sort of beef up the due process for teachers, which I think is good. There is the possibility that a teacher could be wrongly accused of something. So it said, if we prove that this did not happen, these records can be expunged. Teachers who are accused can bring in extra information. I think everything in that bill was good, and it was called the Protect Our Kids Act. But Hildebrandt and Company, or Hilbert and Company, now stripped that bill and stuffed in their old language. And they still call it the Protect Your Kids Act, but it's actually the opposite. What it does now is it makes it harder to decertify a teacher. It says that you have to give 3-day notice for the board to emergency suspend a teacher, which is a little scary. Are we going to leave a teacher in the classroom for 3 days because he's buds with the district superintendent? That to me is really scary. The districts only have to report to the State Department of Education if they themselves recommended to terminate someone. So if someone steps down, they don't have to report it. Nothing changes. They continue to pass the trash.
Then there's no difference.
None. Investigations and accusations under this bill those records are not subject to open records requests. They made sure of that. They have something in there saying the settlements against districts for failing to protect kids can be sealed by the courts and that no one can get to them. They also allow for expungement of records. This one killed me. The Oklahoma State Department of Education cannot respond to subpoenas from law enforcement before notifying the district and giving the district an opportunity to protest those subpoenas. And it directly absolves the district administration or board member from any punishment for failing to report to the OS.
You have to be kidding me.
No, I am not. This is how dangerous these uniparty actors are. So that new version.
Stop 1 second. Okay. Why do they want to protect people hurting children?
So
why do they want to protect people hurting children and then put a label on it? And what Julia said was so important. Common Core was put into law in 2010 in a bill called teacher incentive pay. Wow. I mean, they put these so you can't find it, essentially, right?
Right.
And Janice says protecting predators. Becky said, I don't understand what possible reason they may have to intentionally do all the wrong things. And then Janice says money. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, but what kind of money are they getting from protecting predators? I mean, honestly, Mary, I'm not getting it.
So we're going to get into that a little bit. Your thought process, you're moving faster than me, but I've thought a lot about that because it's the obvious question. Why would the Protect Our Kids Act actually be the Unprotect Our Kids Act and protect the predator, right? My thinking in this is that all of these folks, like I said, who are at the upper echelons of the education establishment, and I am not saying that they are all child predators in any way. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is they've all been, not all, many of them are school administrators, whether they're running one of the NGOs or they're now in the legislature. And school administrators are overly represented in the legislature. They were in positions where they potentially passed the trash in the past. They potentially allowed a predator to step away from a district they ran and go to another one through resignation. So that guilt by association creates a culture that will protect this to the end. And now you're going to be surprised because I'm going to give some grace to those school administrators. And let me tell you why. The lawyers behind all of this, the few law firms that advise school boards, they advise school districts, they're contracted with our money to advise them, along with, say, the State School Board Association, who advises those board members who are looking at an accusation, the School Administrators Association, they advise a superintendent who has someone who's accused of sexually molesting a student. They all are giving the same instruction. And it sounds a little like this. Well, if he resigns or she resigns, there's nothing you can't do. You can't investigate anymore. It's out of your hands legally. So in many cases, they were following this longstanding policy that, which by the way, defies state law on so many levels. And they were doing what they were told to do. Now they're part of this guilt by association, and they will forever protect that. And that's what these laws do. They're protecting these districts to protect the sins of their own past. That's my theory. I don't know what you think of that.
Well, Janice says covering up for buddies.
Yeah, I would agree. It's protectionism, but you know, it's hard. It's hard for people that are good to, in my opinion, Jenny and Mary. It's hard because I have this conversation with my kids all the time between good and evil. It's hard for someone that's good, has good moral values, to not always want to do the right thing, because it's so hard to conceive how bad people can just, you know, do things without any kind of remorse or consequence or anything. It's almost like there's a disconnection there that we can't understand how it can be so hard. But for them, it's easy because it's just part of their everyday life. I don't know. It's just like, it's so black and white, in my opinion. I don't know why we can't just literally take anyone that's had any kind of investigation with the child or any kind of anything. You know, you talk about it. We let them just resign. Then all their personnel files are sealed. They should literally, if you're gonna violate that adult student relationship, you should not have any more protections in any way. I mean, your entire personnel file, everything should be, you know, in the open, in my opinion.
Well, and Roberta says, and I think this is huge. Education is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Education hasn't been about kids for a long, long time. And I do think that there is a money component to it too. And Becky says, but they're elected officials. Why put protecting wrongdoing buddies over our students and their future? And Jana says, because they feel they're above the law, because they have been for so long. And I do think that that's right.
I would agree with every single one of those comments. And I would also say, for all the amazing teachers out there who are dealing with all these kind of things and are incredibly underpaid, you need to understand that the people affecting this policy are the highest paid people in education. Yeah. The disparity between what people who run these education NGOs and unions and what school administrators make and what teachers who are doing the real work make is abhorrent. I would be so upset if I was a teacher, and I'm a huge fan of these great teachers who keep plugging in this environment that really is very difficult to work in with these people. Another thing people don't understand, these districts can choose to pay their teachers more. They seem to always choose to pay these superintendents who hop around from district to district, these exorbitant amounts, but they don't choose to pay their teachers more.
Or if you looked at the TPS audit, they pay people like interior decorators and designers and architects and these crazy people who come up with some crazy scheme that's going to be the next way to get kids to read, and they give them some multi-million-dollar, contract. It's just crazy.
Right? There were 69 NGO contracts in that audit at the public schools. It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
And on that good teacher vein, I mean, I was contacted by many teachers that were good teachers, and they're just so disempowered and they're so bullied, in a way within their own district, and they're micromanaged. And if they say or do anything, they're just completely bullied, and they're literally there because they have hearts of gold. And they just put up with it, but they're just so outnumbered. It's crazy.
It is. I can't tell you the number of teachers who have been sort of anonymous whistleblowers to this publication. They are sick of it. They didn't go in this to see kids unprotected and uneducated. It's a brutal environment right now. And everything we're talking about, this huge political blanket over what they're trying to do, educating children, it's the problem. It's the problem. When you go back to this, it is House Bill 75 that now is the Unprotect Students Act, basically. On March the 17th, it was voted on by the full House with all that horrible language in it that's now been added by our youngest ever speaker, and it passed 84-1.
What?
It passed 84-1. So what this says to me, and
on the House floor,
84-1 with 14 excused votes. The only one person who had their head on straight and seems to know what was in that bill was Tom Gann. He voted against it. That was it. And there are lists. You know who's in the House. There are people who would never vote for this if they were listening to this podcast right before they voted. This says to me that the chaos that they have caused with this flood of legislation that's happening, it gets bigger and bigger every session. Our representatives can't keep up. They're not reading it. They read the first version of it and they don't realize that this bill's been flipped 3 times. The bill number someone is asking is...
I'm going to put it up here.
House Bill 1075. So it's almost like the Marxist thing about creating chaos and you will win. They have created absolute chaos. Yes, it passed 84-1. I give a thumbs up to Tom Gann because he must have read it. And then immediately Senator Siegfried and Representative Chad Caldwell, which we'll talk a little bit about here, became the sponsors of the bill in the 2 chambers. So that's where we are with that bill, 84-1. What are we doing? Okay. And now I want to get to the latest article, which plays into this so strongly. Why are our so-called conservative politicians secretly pushing progressive education policy? So
because they always do, because that's exactly who pushed Common Core and the state longitudinal database and everything else. These people always push liberal education agendas, always.
I think it's super important to start to understand what are these layers of NGOs that have been affecting this forever. We see now President Trump just signed an order saying we're going to axe the Department of Education. That's a governmental organization that added a huge layer between the people having control of the education, state level policy. It added this huge umbrella over it that had a massive effect at making public education more progressive. But there are all of these other similar layers in between, national organizations that states have been a part of, even conservative states, for so many decades that they've become just sort of a given in the state's budget. They've been around forever. We send people to these councils. We have to have so many legislators on their board. These are supposed nonprofits, but they have huge effect on our politicians. This is where they go to hobnob nationally, to look about getting some kind of a national position after they term out. And they are indoctrinated into the federal government's view and the bureaucracy's view of education. So let me talk to you a little bit about this one. Remember, as we get to talk about this, that Governor Stitt in 2023 ordered an end to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and at both the K to 12 level and higher ed. We're not going to do this anymore. So let me talk a little bit about this particular group. So the Board of Control for Southern Regional Education has been around for like 70 years. And there are 16 states that are involved with it. It is your Oklahoma tax money going to this to support this organization. And it was supposedly because the southern states were lagging behind 70 years ago in public education. And they were focused on economic growth. And so we're going to make this another big layer that affects education policy all across the South, right? Right now, this supposed nonprofit has direct ties to USAID funding. It's chaired by Governor Brian Kemp, who is
the worst.
Exactly. We've moved into the Mike Pence branch of the Republican Party here. To give you an idea about Kemp, he's also a member at large of another NGO called Mission Graduates. It's out of San Francisco. It's linked to all kind of USAID money. It helps low-income, Latinx, Black, and immigrant youth and families achieve their college dreams. So that's a defining statement of sort of one of those organizations that's pushing that agenda. So I told you a little bit about how the Board of Control for Southern Regional Education started. They don't say control anymore. They just call themselves the SREB because control would tell a little bit too much about who they really are. But they claim that they work from pre-K to PhD education across a lifetime. And you can see right here, here's all the 16 member states that are sending the tax dollars from their citizens to this group. And they've been doing it for decades, okay? So they have a board, and every state sends their governor and 4 appointees to the board for the SREB. So we have Governor Stitt on there, and we have these 4 folks. So 2 of them have to be state legislators because they then serve on the SREB's Legislative Advisory Council. This is where state legislators from across the country come together and decide what education policy should be for your state. This is a layer of progressive disruption, okay? And in our state, it's Chad Caldwell and Adam Pugh.
Okay, but do you know who Jennifer Monies is?
Yes, so Jennifer Monies is the former Speaker of the House. She was a political reporter, and she's the former Speaker of the House. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, she's been involved with the state chamber for years and years and years.
There you go. There you go. The only other person on there besides them is Keith Sinor, and he was Tuttle's superintendent. He's now at UConn. He's the superintendent of UConn Public Schools, okay? So not a lot of grassroots parents representation on these groups. In fact, none if you kind of go through the states. This isn't about this. This is about hobnobbing of politicians and them deciding education because they know better, okay? So Pugh, just to say a little bit about our 2 representatives to this legislative council, Pugh was one of the main people trying to disrupt the Board of Education executive sessions where they're going after those certifications. The word is that Pugh is planning a run for state superintendent to replace Walters in the upcoming 2026 election, okay? He serves on a lot of the education boards. They also, Representative Caldwell, who is on the SREB Legislative Advisory Committee. He serves a whole lot on committees within the House, so they're controlling education. He was among the 20 or so legislators that joined Governor Stitt in backing Ron DeSantis over President Trump in the last Republican primary for president. So again, very Mike Pence-y, if I can make up a word. And then I talk a little bit about, we already talked about House Bill 1075, that's now in Caldwell's hands. He is a co-author of that. Okay.
Okay, so Stephanie wants to know, so this HB 1075 has to go to the Senate, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we need to get this video out. I'll clip that part. I've got it down on my list of things to clip out, Stephanie, and I'll get that done this afternoon.
And, I don't want to anyone sort of crucified by association here. Derek Hildebrandt, the new representative that I told you about, who originally authored the good bill that this was before it got in the hands of the Uniparty, is trying to fight that. He
bless his heart. It's like, give me my bill back.
Talk about a newbie learning experience.
Yeah.
He voted for it and probably got a lot of props on the back saying, great bill, we're going to carry your bill. This never happens to a newbie, right? So it was probably seemed like a badge of honor. And now that he sees what they did to the bill, I'm told he's over on the Senate side trying to get them to block it. So interesting. So we talked about that. The money that goes to the SREB, it's been moving through the state for a long, long time. But you can't really find it. It's in these big allocation amounts. You can see a couple little places where $10,000 subscriptions came from like the Office of Education Quality and Accountability. But the big money that moves to the SREB is really through what they call contract revenue, which would make you think that they're doing work for this money. But that's not really the case. What's happening with that money is that it's coming from the federal government for them to do sort of what a lot of federal grants say is technical assistance to the states. So they've got millions of dollars to give technical assistance to Oklahoma on teacher training, on teacher recruitment, those kind of things. So don't be fooled. The guy who runs the SREB, so not so much on the board politics side, the guy who is the current president, the functional president, is a guy named Stephen Pruitt, all up in Georgia state education, he was basically the Ryan Walters of Kentucky. He makes over $350,000 a year for working 36 hours a week. These people are extremely well paid. He also is tied to a bunch of other organizations. So this is the Board of Control that we're talking about, and this is the BSCS Science Learning. Those are both tied to USAID grant flow money.
Well, I love it that they call out what they are in their name, BS.
They do. And if you think about that's supposed to be an NGO, that's supposed to be a nonprofit, right? These are just vendors, real or fake, that are sucking money, tax money, out of the education system.
But it goes back to what Roberta said.
Correct.
It's a multi-billion. This is just education anymore is it's
a grip.
It's theft for a jobs program for people who don't really want to get a job. That's what it is.
It is. And our governor sits on this board. Two of our most powerful legislators now go a couple of times a year to their legislative advisory council and talk about legislation. So this is just an example, and you can read this. These are examples of how the SREB has made money off of Oklahoma. Under the state superintendent Hoffmeister, they did this contracted work about training teachers, and that's when everything turned to trauma-focused care. Right? So you can see that progressive influence coming in. Then there was in 2022, $4.5 million from the federal government, the U.S. Department of Ed, to facilitate these roundtables over teacher recruitment. Okay. They also were paid millions by the state regions for higher education. There was another grant, actually came from the federal government, to make recommendations about the Oklahoma Promise college scholarship for low-income students. And then this one's kind of crazy. In their tax filings for the SREB, they have to list their 5 biggest compensated independent contractors. One contractor that this NGO gave $267,000 to was Oklahoma City Public Schools. And it says for inspiring STEM educators. So this looks like Oklahoma City Public Schools is doing work to earn money by inspiring STEM educators. So only 16% of Oklahoma City Public Schools students are proficient in science. So I'm not going to say these are the experts you hire. Here's what I've learned since this article. A science teacher in Oklahoma City said no. They're being paid to take on the science curriculum of the SREB and to utilize that. And this teacher describes it as extremely woke, that it should not be in the schools, this curriculum.
Really?
Yes.
So the SREB has its own curriculum.
So a lot of this is masked in that they're studying this, that they're field testing, that they're seeing how this curriculum works. But people have to be aware. When we say, how the heck did our schools become so progressive in a state like Oklahoma? This is one of those pieces.
Yeah.
Okay, and as if I haven't made you crazy enough, we're getting to the good part. So the SREB pushes DEI throughout everything, through research. They have a very, I call it a racist flagship event, and they fund highly progressive PhDs. So at their 2022 annual board meeting, which again, Governor stood as part of that board, it was all about diversity. And they do things like they say, research shows that students benefit from racially and ethnically diverse teachers. Just
What
research?
research?
Well, down the bottom, Alliance for Resource Equity is one of their sources for that, right?
Resource equity. I mean, just the name of it is BS.
Right. So think about, you've got 16 governors, 4 other people from all these things being fed this at the annual board meeting, right? Diversity is why we have a lack of diversity, is why we have teacher shortages. All of the problem here is it's an equity issue. So this is the SREB at their annual meeting. Okay.
We have a lack of teachers because they're not allowed to do anything that they want to do in their own classrooms. They have to fill in a bunch of bunk. They get bullied by teachers. They get bullied by the administrators. I mean, come on.
And remember, again, Governor Stitt in 2023, anti-DEI, state agencies and institutions for higher education shall not utilize state funds, property, or resources to grant or support diversity, equity, and inclusion. It goes on to say about we can't do these things by race, color, sex, ethnicity, or national origin. We are colorblind. And then he's flowing our money to the SREB, which its annual flagship event, they spent $1.3 million on in 2023, according to their filings, is the largest national gathering of underrepresented scholars of color. 22,000 doctoral scholars and faculty have attended. So this is a pipeline to push diversity into higher ed, as if we need any of that, or if Oklahomans would ever choose to pay for that. So this is from that gathering every year. And then the last piece of this is you paid for it, Oklahoma. Every year, the SREB gives 100 DEI-driven PhD scholarships from their doctoral scholarship program. They call them fellows. And they are very overt about the fact
that that's racist. I mean, that's sexist. They call them fellows. That's sexist.
Well, it is. It's true. And if you think
having a good day until Mary came on.
I'm sorry. People need to know this is for real. The Supreme Court has weighed in on affirmative action. We are past all of this. You cannot have these racist scholarships, and our tax dollars are funding them. So they say in it that their goal is more underrepresented PhD students. They say that it's about people of color. It is very overt. So I want to go through I picked 10 out of their recent cohort. I picked 10 and just started doing some research. The only one of these fellows who is studying in Oklahoma is actually from Michigan. She uses she, her pronouns, studying for her PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Tulsa. She recently received the Psychology Department's Social Justice Award for studying health disparities based on race. Okay, so that's the only benefit that Oklahoma is getting from this taxpayer-funded program. Okay, let's look at another one. This woman went to Clemson University for educational leadership, and this is her dissertation. Brought what I needed to succeed, community cultural wealth in the persistent experiences of former Black Division II Black women basketball players who graduated from predominantly white institutions. That was her research for her dissertation. And just so you know, you're going to hear PWI throughout these. That's a predominantly white institution. Okay. Next, we have this young woman who she studied school psychology, Georgia State. She recently spoke at the National Association of School Psychology conference in New Orleans about, quote, caring for queer youth, how trauma-informed care supports LGBTQ plus students. So now we're working in the whole radical gender ideology with our tax money.
And we're going back to the trauma-informed.
We are doing the trauma-informed, which that's a whole show in itself about how dangerous that is.
Yep.
This next one, now we're going to go after Christianity. She studied rhetoric and composition in Georgia, and her dissertation, quote, investigates the relationship between sexual minority discriminatory sentiment and Christian rhetoric, specifically Bible sermons, speeches, discourse, words declaring LGBTQ plus identities are immoral and condemned by God. So now we're going after a specific religion, the predominant religion of Oklahoma with our tax dollars. This woman, she was, while she was working on her PhD on taxpayer funds, she had a GoFundMe to support financially her trip to Ghana to speak about how African-American educators are, quote, decolonizing adult education. Ghana's big. The LA mayor went to Ghana while LA was burning. Apparently that's a big thing on the progressive side now. This young woman, her dissertation focused on the experiences of Black women in PWIs, again, predominantly white institutions. This young man, and this is something I think people need to understand about the mental health world and its overlap with education. He promotes himself. He was getting his PhD at the University of Mississippi on this scholarship, and he promotes himself as a researcher in liberation psychology and school counseling.
Liberation psychology.
I had not heard the term, but psychology itself, the website, defines it as an emphasizing social justice, collective empowerment, and liberation of marginalized individuals, while challenging and transforming oppressive systems and structures while promoting equality. I'm almost done, but people need to understand how.
Yeah, I'm not sure how. I saw this one, and this one was just offensive. I mean, this is just plain offensive. And yet, apparently our governor signed off on this clearly offensive thing, which is shocking to me. But he's a Christian, so maybe there's some grace there that I don't understand.
Right. And it's signed off on our budget. So did all of the legislators sign off on our budget, participating in the board of this, participating in the legislative advisory council of this group. Yes. So this man came here on a student visa, which makes no sense, from Africa. He came to the U.S. to study Africa's modern and contemporary visual culture. He's actually a political cartoonist, and you can see that this is George Floyd as the Jesus figure. This young man, this one scares me. He studied.
Wait, that one didn't scare you?
It keeps getting more frightening when you think about the impact on our institutions. So he studied cognitive psychology and psycholinguistics at the University of Arkansas. His dissertation is entitled Strategies for Misinformation Correction, Evidence for the Power of Negation. And this is what the study looked like. I looked at it. You can click here and you can go look at it yourself. The participants read these Twitter-like statements, and I will tell you, it is not a representative sample. It's mostly young people. This is bogus science.
Shocking.
And the Twitter statements, which were negated to determine how to best control mass thinking, right? So the negations that they used, the things that they said were false and the things that they said were true, are actually pure propaganda that we've all heard. And this was just one example. They say negation can be used as a tactic to counter a false claim, such as vaccines cause autism.
So that's a false claim. The
That's
vaccines.
a false
that's false
claim, right?
Okay.
Keep in mind, Robert Kennedy, one of the first things he did is that he has ordered a thorough and real study on this exactly because the government's been hiding this from us. So you're going to counter it with a factual rebuttal such as, no, vaccines have never been clearly linked to autism. That's how incredibly misleading this study is, and that's where their money's going. And then last, this young woman, she studied at Auburn on this money, and she's on a little lecture series called The Drawl, Y'all, and the Downfall of College Access Discourses Concerning Black Rural Students and Communities. So just to round out our group, this is, what are your thoughts about how this affects our politicians and what they're pushing for in public education? Oh, we can't hear you, Michael.
Okay, if I could make a comment on all those people, none of those people or their positions or their ideology would exist in the real world if they had to get real jobs without money like USAID and all this shadow money and all these BS organizations that no one even knows about. I mean, the only reason why these people exist is just to push that agenda. They would have to just get real jobs and be regular, real people, and they'd be just like us if they weren't part of that.
Correct. I mean, in the pipeline here we talk about how did our institutions of higher learning become ideologically absconded, where we see these uprisings on campus, pro-Palestinian, violent protests, these kind of things. This is what tax dollars have been pumping into the system for years. And no one ever argued on an Oklahoma budget. They've got it hidden among these huge appropriation numbers, and you can't even see it. So this has been going on forever. We're discovering at the federal level and at the state level how many NGOs have been running our world in education.
Yet, Jenny, if there's a wildfire, there's sure not enough resources for the local county fire departments to come out there and go help all the good people of Oklahoma. I mean, you saw that. I mean, yes, you did get help, but look at all the people that had major problems.
No, I mean, you're right. We're not putting resources where they need to go to help taxpayers. And I do want to go back here because Becky says, and don't forget, this is Dr. Pelham who works in education. This is so frustrating. The bar is being lowered everywhere. I read Harvard is having to offer remedial algebra for the first time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And then Sandy, who is also Dr. Harrell, who works in education in Oklahoma. For my EdD, I studied teacher retention in Oklahoma, in rural Oklahoma schools. Paid for it myself, then was denied access to the OSDE data for researching an article on Oklahoma school climate.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, Harvard recently offered that, families under 200,000 don't have to pay tuition. Did you see that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to argue, but I think this is funny. Julia said, I'm only 5'1". Does that make me marginalized?
But now when you come back to Oklahoma and you see all this legislation coming through and all these politicians aligning, you start to understand behind the scenes what they really want for public education.
Yeah, but when Julie and I and Lynn and Joy, when we were working so hard on the Common Core thing, we found out, because we were all pretty new to the whole legislative thing, Common Core was what, kind of catapulted us into this. And we found out very quickly that the National Governors Association was the one who was slamming Common Core down on the states. No, you got to take it. No, you got to take it. So was the state superintendents. Oh gosh, what's the name of that one? National State Superintendents Organization, whatever that one was. They were doing the same thing. So it's so many of these groups. And Michael, you've said it before on the show. You've said we should write a bill that prevents legislators from being allowed to be in any kind of group like the NGA or the what is it, whatever the state school superintendents organization is. I mean, we should just make a law that says you can't get involved in these things, because this is where all this nasty garbage comes from, is from outside the state. And we just bring it in and lap it up because, oh, we got a federal grant for it, or, oh, because this big organization says we should. I mean, it's just flat crazy. No, not the, she says OSSBA. No, the national one.
Yes.
Which I can't remember.
Well, it's that swinging door throughout all of politics.
Yeah.
It is.
And corporations, and I mean, it goes back to all the money. It's just about control of money. That's what it comes down to.
It is. The encouraging thing is there's so much information coming out about these NGOs, particularly the education NGOs. I'm so glad you brought up the National Governors Association. So this morning on Twitter, and this is someone from Oklahoma, she goes under the title at Rebuke Woke.
Yes.
Woke,
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she put out something about the National Governors Association. And Governor Stitt is the vice chair of that. At their latest meeting, Randy Weingarten of the National Teachers Association was one of their key speakers. It was just this cozy event. There was someone from Canada, some Canadian NGO, giving them advice about things. So I just went on for like 2 minutes and started doing research. They have something besides the National Governors Association that is the Center for Best Practices.
Yes. 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 It's an ancillary.
They get massive federal grants from all kinds of agencies, federal agencies that have nothing to do with education. And they also get USAID money.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that National Governors Association, that is a force working against the people.
Absolutely it is. And don't forget, and it just kills me. So Governor Stitt is vice chair of that. Well, what happened when Mary Fallon was the chair of the National Governors Association? I don't know why they always pick Oklahoma. I guess it's because they want to infect us the most or something. So they keep taking our fawning,
Hey,
you
we have the
know.
model good old boys club, Jenny. We got the model good old boys club. But I got to go. Mary, thank you so much. I know you and Jenny probably talked for a while, but I've got an appointment with my daughter.
Yes,
Thank you, Michael. Go enjoy.
Take care, Michael. Have fun. Good weekend. But yeah, I mean, there's got to be something to do here, because these people, that's what these people do. I mean, they literally talk their way into other states and get these progressive agendas going. And then all of a sudden, the people that we elect stop listening to us because, oh, well, we're getting a federal grant from the National Governors Association to do this. I mean, who cares?
Yeah, who does care? And when we come back to our state legislature, I think it's really important that people start to understand how they're shoving these bills through. Which bills are being heard, and that your speaker can grab a bill and just flip it in the middle of the night at the behest of the governor and go after what the people elected our state superintendent to do. And then which bills, if you look in this, it's hard to even keep up, the bills that are not being heard. I know that Senator Shane Jett, who's really been a protector of children in the education space, he has 4 of them, 4 bills up that are even in the Senate about pass the trash law, for parents to have choice about sex education, going after predator pensions and some things about predator prosecutions within education. They're not even making it out of committee. Something's got to change.
Well, I do think, there's a crop of representatives who's just been doing a really great job, that were newly elected, and they've been doing a really great job. I'm absolutely shocked about the one bill that you were telling us about, that only one person voted against it, because I definitely believe, like Gabe Woolley, Molly Jenkins, Jim Shaw, they never would have voted for that had they known what that was. So I think
all of them.
Sherry says we have language to fix 1075. The title was taken off on Monday because the House author wants to make sure the bill protects children. So you mean by the bill's author, Sherry, you mean Hildebrandt then?
Correct.
And not the takeover artists.
Broken Trust, I believe, has been on this and working with the original bill author. So, which thank goodness. Thank goodness. But it's impossible. It's impossible to keep up with all of them. And honestly, I'm not even sure what else is going to slip through in this session.
Well, I mean, if you heard what we were talking about with Jason Murphy this morning, I mean, he's even having trouble nailing down this 2-committee system, and he explained it. It is so much. He explained it this morning a little bit about saying, the second committee system, you can't have, 2 committees meeting at one time. You can't be on the floor and have a committee meeting and that kind of thing. And so they're having trouble slotting in these second committee meetings, having trouble. That probably wasn't what they intended in the first place. I'm sure of it. But they're having trouble slotting these in. So then they just have to do a whole bunch of them at one time, which again, really foils transparency on the taxpayer. Well, and that's another point too. Sherry says, and they can meet 3 times a week, which doesn't, I mean, how are you going to track that down? And I think they only have to have a 24-hour notice too. So I think the only way around it, and I will say, Jason was really good about saying, hey, we're, getting a handle on it. I mean, the grassroots is turning out and getting people elected. And I completely agree with that. But I'm telling you, we got another election next year, and we better be on it. I mean, we better be on it, because we've got to get at least 20 more in the House of Representatives to make much of a difference, and probably 5 or 6 in the Senate. I mean, so we have to just pay attention and turn these people over, turn them out and get somebody new.
Right. And for the good people who are serving in the state legislature, not every bill makes it to the floor for a vote. Don't vote for anything you haven't read. This is clearly happening. Don't take anyone else's opinion for what that bill says or doesn't say.
I want to see it. Can you post it here or like tag me or something and I'll put it up? Dr. Pelham says disbanding the Department of Ed should help because prevent these outside influences, in theory at least. We just need our state leaders to choose what's best for Oklahoma students. I still can't understand how people who have answered the call to serve make such harmful choices. And I agree, but here's the thing that I worry about. I want the federal Department of Education to be gone. Yes. Mm-hmm. But until you get Congress to revoke the ESSA, which is the overriding law that regulates what happens with states, mind you, on education, all that's going to happen is the State Department of Education is going to go away, and we're just going to move the parts of the ESSA to different areas. So like the Department of Labor will get the workforce part. Department of Health and Human Services will get another part. Well, so it's not going to change anything. I'm sorry, guys. I don't see it changing anything. What would change everything is getting rid of the ESSA. That would do it, voiding it out, null and voiding it. Bingo. We have what's going on right here in Oklahoma. That would be predominantly what goes on. But until they get rid of the ESSA, it doesn't matter what they do to the Department of Education. It just flat doesn't matter.
I agree with that in part. But I do think, because you're right, getting rid of the ESSA would be a huge coup for people getting control back. But right. I think breaking up those pieces eliminates this massive technical assistance training thing that the U.S. Department of Ed had. That was a huge vehicle. They had a huge staff for that. And that's where the conferences and every different funding stream, you have to go to your annual conference. That's where they really push their progressive agenda.
But see, they're still doing that at the Department of Labor and the Department of Health and Human Services, and they still have all of those there, and they'll just end up taking it up there. Again, I mean, you and I may have to disagree on one thing, and that is I just don't see it until you get the ESSA gone. I don't see it doing any difference.
You may be right. I might be a Pollyanna on this, but I would say to what Dr. Pelham said also, getting rid of the U.S. Department of Ed is a big step. But also the fact that they've basically busted USAID that's flowing so much money to these ed NGOs. It'll be interesting to see over the next 6 months or a year how many of them go away. If they have no money.
It'll be like Politico. If you take all my subscriptions, which are all being paid for by tax dollars.
Correct. Then all of a sudden, are some of them not making payroll right now? That's the part that's going to be interesting to watch.
Exactly. Julia said they're working so hard to poison our state legislators nationwide so that when the states figure out that they're supposed to have the power, the corruption continues. And I do believe that is the case. I do believe they try hard to get states away from the 10th Amendment. They don't want people it's what we talked about with Spino and the Lincoln thing. You know, the powers that be don't want the states to have their power, which they're supposed to have. They don't want to because that's like now you've got 50 cats running around that you're trying to, do something with. They don't want that. They want the federalists. They want the big federal government, to come in and mommy and daddy everybody, because then they can rope them all into one group and get them going in one direction. And that's what we have to really worry about. But our elected officials, so many of them, as people on this show point out over and over and over again, don't even have a clue what the Constitution says.
True. They don't. I mean, and you look at how they're just overriding the state constitution about who should be running the Board of Education. They don't care because it doesn't work for them.
No,
they don't care. And they're not even reading bills that they're voting for. And I know some of that's by design, and there are good people who've been overwhelmed, but it's got to end.
Yeah, and they want to rule, not represent. They need weak families for that to happen. And that's 100%. I mean, if they go in and weaken the family structure and make kids dumb through these stupid, well, it's more important, your feelings. I know you can't count back change or do basic math, but golly, your feelings are important.
Well,
where did we get there?
One last comment I would make is that Oklahoma's youngest ever House Speaker is off to a very rough start with We the People.
Bad start. Very bad start. I completely concur there. All right. Well, I have pulled out some things that we're going to definitely, like I said, I told Stephanie, I've made notes about where she talked about those bills, and I'll get those pulled out really fast so that we can, and I might just take a second because we don't have a whole bunch of people on YouTube today. I think we only have, thank you, the one person who's watching on YouTube. But if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll get when I when I make the clips and I upload them, they go directly to YouTube. I don't put them on Rumble because of the fact that it's too hard to find with their system. I'm not a huge YouTube fan, but we have a great channel on YouTube. They are so good about, here's your spot for this, and everything that we put on YouTube is so easy to find for people who are just searching. So we put that up there. So if you'll go and subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can find just under Rope Report, it comes right up if you search it on YouTube. Then if you sign up for our channel, then as soon as I get those clips made, it sends you a notification saying, hey, Rope Report just put up a new thing, you might want to watch it, and then you can get it to go. It's Jana. Thank you, Jana. I really appreciate you watching from YouTube. Please go there and do that, and that will help because then you'll be able to find those as they come up. So anything else today, Mary?
No, I think that was enough.
Yes, you really gave our weekend a good start.
That's okay. We're eyes wide open. That's what you need. And you're right. Next year is the next year and a half
Pivotal.
is going to be massive for Oklahoma.
Pivotal. I mean, if the grassroots are going to mean what they say and say what they mean, then they've got to get out there and find good candidates, support good candidates, get good candidates elected. It's the only way to go. Such a great way. And Julie says, such a great conversation. Of course, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. And we always appreciate everybody who watches every single time we're on. And you guys stuck with us for 4 this week. So, and thank you so much, Mary, for coming on at a different time, because Mary was supposed to be on Wednesday, but our state auditor and inspector had a meeting, and that was the only time she could do. So we really appreciate Mary for being so fluid and allowing us to do this at a different time. So
anytime. Thank you for the opportunity to spread the word. We'll keep dragging it out into the light.
Well, and God love you. You do a great job with that. And we're so glad and so grateful for you. Absolutely. And just like we are of our friends who watch, and thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. We'll see you again next Wednesday at 9 a.m. with, David Bullard is going to be here next Wednesday at 9 a.m. to talk about what bills left the Senate that he's concerned about or needs to have us or help to get passed. So you're not going to want to miss next Wednesday at 9. So be there and have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you then. Bye.